1066, one of the most famous dates in history. The last time a foreign army conquered England, and more recently, the seed that spawned a really annoying advert on the TV. But why did the Normans win the Battle of Hastings? That's our key question for this podcast. Well, before we even get stuck into the battle itself, the fact that the Saxons even came close to winning, they did come close, very close, was an amazing achievement in itself, considering what the Saxons had to deal with before the battle. Firstly, the Saxons had been expecting an invasion all summer, which is, funnily enough, when battles tended to happen in history, pretty much right up until the First World War. It was almost like the war season started when the weather got better. A bit like the cricket season, perhaps. Anyway, the Saxon army was mostly made up of peasants who owed military service to their overlords, see Training and Recruitment podcast. But that period of military service only lasted for 3 months, stretched to its absolute limit. And when it got to autumn, the peasants' term of service had long since run out, and the king, Harold Godwinson, had to let the peasants go because the harvest needed to be collected and not left to rot in the fields. So they needed to get this harvest or the country might face famine. In other words, Harold had no choice but to let them go. This meant that when the invasion did happen, Godwinson had to hurry to gather his army back to him. The second problem before the battle was that the Saxons weren't facing just one invasion, but 2. And whilst the Saxons were guarding the south coast in case of a Norman invasion, the Vikings invaded in the north. And Godwinson had to hurriedly gather an army and rush north, where he beat 10,000 Vikings at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. But the Vikings don't die easily, and this took quite a toll on the Saxon army, and with many of the fearsome Huscarls, again, see podcast on Training and Recruitment, the Huscarls, the most fearsome of the Saxon warriors, well, many of them had been injured or killed. Whilst the Saxons were in the north, the Normans invaded in the south, completely unopposed. They were unopposed because of the third big reason, which was that there was a storm in the Channel that had damaged the Saxon fleet being the name for a number of ships, naval ships, and they had been forced back to port. So even before the battle began, the Saxons had been forced to send most of their army back to farm. They'd seen their ships damaged by a storm, and they'd had to stop an invasion led by one of the most feared warriors in the world at the time, called Harold Hardrada. And despite all of that, the Saxons still nearly won. But in your exam, you could argue that the Saxons lost the Battle of Hastings because of what happened before the battle even started. And there's no doubt that poor old Harold Godwinson was unlucky. Interesting point. Harold Godwinson couldn't only blame luck. When he arrived in London on his way south to meet the Normans, after fighting the Vikings, his brother, with the brilliant name of Gurth, pleaded with him to wait for reinforcements. But Harold didn't take his brother's advice and marched south quickly. One reason for this was because William of Normandy had ordered his army to burn, rape and pillage to try to force Godwinson to come to battle quickly. It worked. So apart from luck, or bad luck for the Saxons, there was a good decision from William, although it wasn't a very nice decision, and a bad decision from Godwinson, who didn't wait for the reinforcements as his brother Gurth suggested he should. During the battle itself, the Saxons positioned themselves at the top of a hill and locked their shields to make a shield wall at the top of this hill. The hill, by the way, was called Senlac Hill. And they stuck their spears in gaps between the shields to stab at the enemy. Now, this shield wall was a standard Saxon tactic, and it was pretty formidable, especially when at the top of a hill. The Normans had archers and cavalry to support their soldiers, but with the steep hill, the cavalry charge was unable to have really any impact. The Saxon shield wall held for hours, and then some of the Norman troops broke and fled. Now, the undisciplined and untrained feared facing them, so the feared was, again, see the Training and Recruitment podcast, The feigned was the peasants, basically, the peasant part of the Saxon army, not the housecarls, who were disciplined professional soldiers, but the undisciplined and untrained feigned, the peasants, facing these Normans that ran off, ran down the hill after them, leaving the safety of the Saxon shield wall and coming off the top of the hill in all their excitement to chase their enemy. The Norman cavalry, seeing this, made quick work of them once they were off the hill, because there was no steep hill to stop them from, to lessen their charge. So as soon as this small force of feigned came off the top of the hill, they were wiped out. Now the Bayeux Tapestry, very famous Bayeux Tapestry, if you don't know what it is, look it up online, suggests that William of Normandy saw this happen, this little action where just a few soldiers came off the top of the hill and some of his soldiers ran away, and ordered his army to keep doing this, to fake that they were running off in fear and horror that they were going to be slaughtered, so that the feigned would see this and chase them down the hill, and when they're at the bottom of the hill, the cavalry could ride them down and kill them. This would be called the tactic of using a feigned retreat. Interesting fact, there is some evidence that this was a tactic the Normans were used to using, and had done so whilst fighting in Italy many years earlier. So perhaps this might have been planned from the beginning instead of being an opportunity that William took. Eventually, through a combination of feigned retreats, the exhaustion of fighting all day long, having marched the length of the country twice and also fought the Vikings, and because of the toll taken by Norman archers, the Saxons began to break up. Harold Godwinson was killed, either hit in the eye by an arrow, chopped down by knights, or both, and then the Saxons began to flee, and the real slaughter began. So if you're wondering about, or you have to answer a question about why the Battle of Hastings was lost, you could think of bad luck, which we've mentioned, maybe some poor decisions from Godwinson, maybe some clever decisions from William, in addition to the Normans having access to a variety of troops. Because the Saxons may have had some archers, but they certainly didn't fight with cavalry. And all of these things led to the Norman victory. There's loads more on this topic on the 6th form pages of this website if you're feeling like aiming for that A star, because actually the 6th formers have to study the Battle of Hastings in quite a bit of detail. But what you need to do is to consider what you think was the key reason that William won. That's the most important thing of all of the things. As ever, we'll end this podcast by showing you some of the past questions that have come up on this topic.